All right, let's dive straight into this explainer. For way too long, we've thought of sleep as just this passive time when the brain simply powers down for the night. But we need to fundamentally, completely shift that perspective. Sleep is absolutely not a passive luxury. It is the ultimate biological arbiter of our health span, our cognitive survival, and our baseline emotional stability. Today, we're going to treat it as what it really is: a highly active, life-sustaining recalibration mechanism that dictates almost everything about how we function, how we perform, and frankly, how we age.
To solve this modern medical mystery, we have to start with a foundational question. Why does chronic stress make it biologically impossible to actually achieve restorative sleep? To get the answer, we have to look past the surface symptoms. We all know that awful tired but wired feeling, right? Staring at the ceiling at 3 a.m. in a mental doom spiral, or waking up utterly exhausted with crippling brain fog. But to understand why that happens, we have to trace the systemic biological breakdown all the way down to the molecular level. So let's jump into Section 1, the stress-sleep feedback loop. We're going to start by examining the unified biological framework of our body's interconnected pacemakers. In a healthy, functioning state, deep NREM sleep actively hits the brakes on your HPA axis, which is your body's central stress response system. This suppression lets your cortisol hit its absolute lowest point near midnight, giving your nervous system permission to fully rest. But when you're chronically stressed, your hypothalamus triggers corticotropin-releasing hormone, or CRH. This drives a vicious cycle of nighttime ACTH and cortisol release. It literally hijacks your nervous system in the middle of the night. You're forced into a state of alertness and severe sleep fragmentation that makes deep rest biologically impossible.
What's genuinely startling here is that microneurography studies actually show a near doubling of muscle sympathetic nerve activity in chronic insomnia patients. Just think about that. Because of this stress-sleep dysregulation, your nervous system is literally locked in a high reactivity state. You might be lying completely still in a dark, quiet room, but because you are flooded with catecholamines, your body physically believes it's under mortal threat. It keeps you hypervigilant and entirely incapable of relaxing.
And this is where a terrifying biological tipping point occurs: cumulative sleep restriction. We're talking just 3 or more nights at about 4.5 hours, activates inflammatory genes like NF-kappa B. Your immune cells start aggressively pumping out cytokines like IL-6 and TNF-alpha, which rapidly elevates C-reactive protein. This dramatically accelerates systemic aging and metabolic dysfunction. But the truly devastating part? These inflammatory cytokines literally feed back into the brain to further destroy your sleep architecture. It becomes a biological death spiral. Your brain's desperate attempt to stay awake creates the very inflammation that prevents you from ever achieving deep sleep again.
Okay, moving right along to Section 2, the biochemistry of the master clock. The crucial piece of the puzzle here is understanding how the brain actually attempts to synchronize all this chaos using a highly specific neurochemical cascade. Deep within the pineal gland, the process of sleep initiation begins with serotonin. It's a vital neurotransmitter that acts as the essential raw material for our master biological clock. But what's really fascinating is that serotonin is largely produced in your gut and is heavily tied to your daytime behaviors, like your sunlight exposure and your diet. It brilliantly bridges the gap between how we live our lives during the day and how well we are able to sleep at night.
This kicks off an awe-inspiring evolutionary process. The simple absence of photons hitting your retina as the sun goes down acts as a massive systemic signal. This fading light triggers an enzyme called N-acetylserotonin to convert that serotonin into N-acetylserotonin deep inside your brain. It is an incredible, beautiful display of molecular timekeeping, perfectly synchronized to the rotation of the planet and the fading of daylight in your immediate environment.
Finally, the enzyme HIOMT catalyzes the ultimate transformation into melatonin. Now, melatonin is widely misunderstood by a lot of people as just a simple sedative or a sleeping pill. It is not. It is a systemic biological bullhorn. Melatonin is a powerful hormone that binds to receptors in the suprachiasmatic nucleus, the brain's master pacemaker, and yells darkness to every single organ in your body. It forcefully shuts down the sympathetic nervous system so you can finally transition into a restorative state.
Which brings us to Section 3, NREM, or what I like to call the deep brainwash.
Now that we've successfully initiated sleep, let's explore the profound mechanical and cellular restoration that actually occurs. I honestly didn't grasp the sheer scale of this until looking at the evidence. The synaptic homeostasis hypothesis shows that your brain is actively pruning the noisy, energetically expensive synaptic connections you made all day long. Think about the massive energetic cost of wakefulness. If your brain didn't prune these connections during slow-wave NREM sleep, it would literally run out of cellular energy and physical space. This nighttime downscaling isn't a luxury. It is an absolute life-or-death requirement for your neurons to reset their energy baseline for the next day.
And at the exact same time, a massive physiological clearance is happening. The deep, slow-wave oscillations of NREM sleep act as a physical pump. They powerfully drive cerebrospinal fluid through the brain's glymphatic system, utilizing astroglial channels as a literal power washer for your brain. This rhythmic pulsation violently flushes out neurodegenerative waste that accumulated while you were awake, specifically clearing out toxic amyloid beta and tau proteins. This process right here is a direct biological link between getting deep NREM sleep tonight and preventing catastrophic cognitive decline and Alzheimer's disease decades in the future.
All right, on to Section 4, REM, your overnight emotional therapy. So, once the brain has physically washed itself, it shifts into a completely different physiological state designed entirely for emotional survival. REM sleep creates a neurochemically safe environment where your brain is largely devoid of stress chemicals like noradrenaline. This unique state allows you to process your daily trauma without triggering a massive fight-or-flight response. REM sleep actively strips the painful, visceral emotional charge away from your memories, while safely storing the information itself. It's exactly why a furious, relationship-ending argument from the night before suddenly feels manageable and much less severe after a full restorative night of sleep. But what happens when we skip it? Well, without this essential REM sleep, you experience a catastrophic severing of your brain's internal communication network. Neuroimaging brilliantly illustrates this. Without restorative rest, the functional connectivity between your medial prefrontal cortex, which acts as the logical, reasoning adult in the room, and your amygdala, the highly reactive, panicking child, is completely severed. This leaves you totally emotionally dysregulated, stripped of all top-down executive control over your feelings and impulses.
Have you ever wondered why a minor email typo feels like a career-ending catastrophe when you're completely exhausted? Well, this is exactly why. Sleep deprivation triggers a massive 60% amplification in your amygdala's reactivity to negative emotional stimuli. This perfectly explains the extreme daytime emotional exhaustion, the crippling anxiety, and why your nervous system interprets completely harmless, small inconveniences as massive, life-threatening events.
So, what happens when this all falls apart? Let's look at Section 5, when the system breaks. What happens when chronic, extreme stress completely breaks this beautiful system of emotional and physical recalibration? In severe conditions like PTSD, we see a tragic biological misfire. The locus coeruleus completely fails to shut down during REM sleep. That means noradrenaline stays artificially high on the brain, completely destroying that neurochemically safe environment we talked about. It turns what should be your overnight emotional therapy into terrifying reinforced traumatic replays. Sleep, which is supposed to heal your trauma, instead weaponizes it, meaning those fear memories can never be cleanly extinguished.
The biological evidence for this systemic failure is just undeniable. Patients experiencing this exhibit chronically elevated noradrenaline, both during the day and right there in their cerebral spinal fluid after they wake up. What this severe neuroendocrine dysregulation actually means for a living, breathing human being is that their body is physically trapped in a war zone. With sympathetic vagal tone remaining high even during REM sleep, their nervous system is utterly unable to rest even when they are completely unconscious. This actively prevents any real chance of psychiatric recovery.
Which leads us to our final part, Section 6, Resetting the Biological Clock.
Fortunately, clinical psychiatry has discovered some extreme, highly targeted interventions to force this broken system back into alignment. Adjunctive triple chronotherapy is a rigorous clinical protocol that actually uses strategic total sleep deprivation for up to 36 hours, followed by phase advancement and intense bright light therapy at 10,000 lux. It's entirely counterintuitive, right? Using intense, deliberate sleep deprivation to actually fix sleep architecture? But it highlights just how robust and stubborn the circadian pacemaker is when it comes to violently resetting a misaligned biological clock in severely depressed patients.
And the results of this rapid biological intervention? They are genuinely staggering. Within just 5 days, acutely depressed inpatients saw dramatic, clinically significant drops in their symptoms. Hamilton depression scores plummeted from a severe baseline of nearly 25 all the way down to a 9.4. Suicidality scores dropped just as radically. It is absolute proof that these severe psychiatric issues are deeply physiologically rooted in our circadian rhythms, and that manipulating our biological clocks can rapidly alter the course of mental illness.
So, it all comes down to this. Sleep is a highly active, mandatory biological recalibration of our endocrine, immune, and emotional networks. It ties absolutely everything together. Without proper regulation, your HPA axis spirals out of control, your glymphatic system completely fails to wash away toxic proteins, and your prefrontal cortex loses its grip on your emotional stability. Sleep is the non-negotiable foundation of human biology. It is the master switch for systemic health, recovery, and longevity.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, you really have to ask yourself a terrifying question. How are your daily habits altering your own molecular timekeeping? If you aren't getting the deep NREM to physically wash your brain and the REM to emotionally process your daily life, what biological debt are you accumulating tonight? And more importantly, when will your nervous system force you to pay it back?